Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Ken. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Ken. They gave me this. I don't know if I need it. Would you buy insurance from me? This is good, huh? You know, can you guys hear me okay? You're liable to hear a little whistle in my voice tonight. It has nothing to do with the Kobe tapes. I am going through a massive refiguration of my mouth. I was sent to a periodontist because they realized my mouth was growing crooked. I don't know why. And anyway, little 35, 40-year-old gal who's working on it said, "You must have hit your mouth very hard on something when you were young to totally distort your bone structure like this." And she's so young, I didn't want to say year, like floors, knees, fist, clubs, So I acted very innocent. I said, "I can't remember anything specifically, But it's really great being here, and I want to thank Al and the folks who invited me, and Ed and Mike and Graham and the guys who picked me up. You got to visualize this now. I had Ed out to San Diego, and he came to our Drunks Only meeting a couple of times while he was out there. And there's like two major roads that leave this area. One is Route 5, which runs from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. It's like a major, major road. And then there's this little 15 that kind of veers off. And Edward was going to San Francisco, so I said to him, "If you wait till after the meeting, I'll put you on the right road." He said, "I appreciate that." So I stopped to put him on the right road, and he was so excited about going, he drove right past me on the wrong road. And he's beeping and waving, and I'm trying to wave him down, and he's... So then Al says, "Ed was going to pick you up when you come in here." I said, "Oh my God, So I called him and gave him all the dope on where I was coming, and then I get to the airport, and they tell me that the flight I was on is canceled. I'm not only not going to be on that flight, I'm going to change airlines completely, go into a whole different terminal. Instead of coming out of Dallas, I'm flying to St. Louis, so I figured, I got to call Edward and tell him all this, But, he was right there. And then they decided to take me for something to eat. It's 3 in the morning, and we went to Lenny's or Denny's or Penny's or whatever. And there's these barrels there, which usually, like in California, is an indication they don't want you to go there. So they immediately went there. And there's arrows pointing towards us, which in California usually means you're going the wrong direction. And we were. And I was like giving him bonus points because he was at the right place at the right time. So I figured, well, I'll give him some leverage. But we managed to get here, which was great. That's the main thing. And I've enjoyed the convention. I apologize. I've been really, really tired. I had, Peggy mentioned that Dick had some heart problems and then went in for bypass, which I was unaware of, and it's great that everything has come out so well. I had a call about 6 weeks ago. My brother was going in for some routine gallbladder surgery, and he was supposed to go in on a Monday, have it, and be home, and Friday night they took him in, and they thought he was having a gallbladder problem. He was in coronary arrest. So they did a 4 bypass for him on a Saturday morning. And he, that caused me to have to go and do some things that changed my plans. And then we got home, and my sister and he, who haven't talked for 10 years over something that neither one of them can remember, I called her to let her know what was going on. I felt, and I have really leverage with my sister because I'm the only one in the family who talks to her. So when she gets sassy with me on the phone, I say, if I hang up this phone, you have no contact with anyone. So don't make me do this to you. So then she immediately puts down her beer and starts to listen. It's great. And but my sister said, okay. So she called, and then they decided to meet 3 weeks ago. So they met. It lasted about 40 minutes. And something was unresolved, I guess. But my brother flew back home and called me and said, that's just it. I just don't know what's going on with her. She just drinks and you can't relate to her. And next day I got a call. My sister had a stroke. And she was in the hospital. So I called my brother and I said, our sister can't talk. I'm trying to tell her she had a stroke and she has partial paralysis. He said, best thing could have happened to her. So there's just been a lot going on. So when I arrived here this weekend, expecting to be in around midnight and getting in around 3, it's like, I just been sleeping. It just seemed like everything over the last month or so just kind of hit me, and like I just been knocked out here. So I apologize that I haven't been more visible. And then I was listening, though, to the speakers I did hear. And, you guys, for being, some of you said this is your first convention. You're blessed to hear good speakers at your first convention, up till now anyway. And if you're young and you're sitting here, I want to tell you this because this really impressed me, is that I was sitting here looking at Bill and Bob. They were at a meeting like 1970. I got sober in July of 70. And I went to a deal in 71, and there were pictures just like this, the same pictures on the wall. And I remember sitting there saying, those old farts. How can anybody relate to those old farts? And tonight when I was putting on my tie, I said, who's this old fart? When did all that happen? I just remember having a couple of Diet Pepsis and that was it. A Snickers bar and boom, you're here. And these guys will never get any older, so they'll look this good always. And it won't be so for us who just keep going. It just gets different. And I was just amazed at and when Tom's talking, because he said 2 things that I always relate to, and that is try to be where you're at. If you're not where you're at, you're nowhere. It's easy to be a human doing, but to be a human being is a real tough job. It's a full-time deal. It's a real full-time deal. And he talked about blackouts. And I was thinking, can you imagine some guy in the 60s got really wasted on some potent stuff or booze, and he's just coming out of a blackout. It's 30-some years later, and he hears John Glenn is still in space. Wow, Dad. Hey, dude, that's really something, huh? 36 years in space. No, Yato, he's been home a couple of times, But it's a real good deal because I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love it because it saved my life, simply put. I come from a long line of people who were out to hurt themselves through alcohol. And, I always had perceptual problems too, people say, some people see the glass half full, some people see it half empty. I always saw it as too small, this is it, just too small for me, And my mom, who never really drank, used to look at beer cans and look at the ingredients. Then she'd look at me, the way I was acting. She said, I don't know what they put in here makes you act so stupid. And my mom loved me. I mean, she just loved me. But it was a deal where it was like she had no idea what was going on most of the time. The hamster's dead, but the wheel is still turning. That boy's funny, And this is Halloween night, Peggy had mentioned it's Clancy's birthday, and I think it's 40, is that right? 40 years, and back home they're having a big Halloween party down where I live in San Diego, and every year they have a big Halloween dance, and you come dressed as your favorite character defect. I'll tell you, you never knew lust had so many looks, I mean to tell you. what an order. I mean, you know, it's unbelievable. And you get to see that, you're like, wow, I stood at the turning point. I mean, like, you know, and you say, wow, is this exciting, you know? And everybody kind of comes dressed up as their favorite character defect. And, you know, it seems like everything is apropos. Everybody seems to know exactly what their favorite character defect is. You know, I am real happy to be here. I woke up last night and there were like machines going down like my end of the building around 12:30, and they were moving sand and there was heavy equipment. And I thought, I know we turned the clock some way, but you know, this still seems like the middle of the night. and it was about 12:30. So I sat there and I watched a guy actually work a piece of equipment at 12:30 at night. And I thought, look how much work he's getting done, and the rest of us are napping, and he was able to move big chunks of sand with this thing that he had. It kind of went into the ground and picked up stuff. And I thought, you know, this is an amazing world we live in. You know, this is an amazing world we live in. All this technology, all this distraction, you know, goes on all the time, and it's so easy to get caught up in it. It's so easy to get caught up in it. I'm not a moviegoer. I think I went to the movie about 1.5 years ago, and the movie I went to see before that, I think, was Gunga Din with Cary Grant, and that was it. And I'm not a big moviegoer. But a buddy of mine was going through a real tough time, and he took me, he said, let's go to this movie. And it was a sad day afternoon. I wasn't working, so I went. And it was the Titanic. And I don't like going to see movies where I already know the end. But I didn't want to ruin it for him, but God, I know it sinks, you know. But I figured maybe he didn't know, you know, so I thought this could be like a big crescendo for him. I didn't want to take away that big thrill at the end. But I hope he knows it goes down, you know. And we went to see this movie, and it ended up being the best picture of the year. It won the Academy Award for the best picture of the year. Now, I hadn't been in a theater in I don't know how long. And first of all, you know, we used to be like 17 cents. Now it's like $5, and you get a senior discount. And you buy popcorn, and if you buy certain popcorns, you got to get a mortgage. You know, like it's like you want this, or terms. You know, like. And so I was sitting there, and it was like the movie was crowded because this is a popular movie, and we watched this movie. It lasted about 3 hours. A great movie, but I got there early. And he and I were sitting down because we wanted to get good seats, and we saw the screen. And then the movie came on for 3 hours, and then it went off, and then everybody was rushing to get out, and I'm not a rusher, so I kind of sat. And I was looking at the screen, and the thing that became so very apparent to me is that screen was like God. And I said that to him. He said, "What are you staring at?" I said, "I'm staring at that screen." And he said, "Why?" I said, "It reminds me of God." He said, "How can a screen in a movie theater remind you of God?" And I said, "Well, I'm sitting here when we first got here, and there was nothing on there. And everything on that screen was obvious to me. It was just blank. And then they started this movie, and the projector came on, and for 3 hours, everybody in that place, including me, was totally distracted. The screen was still there, but we were totally distracted by all the stuff that was going on that was good. And then it was over, and we left, and the screen was still there. It always was, always will be, and always remains the same. And I remember getting that as a kid in school, in parochial school, from a little Baltimore catechism. What is God? God always was, always will be, and always remains the same. And I thought, that's the story of alcoholism right there. That's an alcoholic story, because my life, like every other alcoholic I know, has been a life of distraction. Total distraction from who we are. And sitting in that movie theater, it became so apparent to me that that's how we get distracted. We have these minds that project stuff up there and takes up all our time, and we think it's real. And it's never real. It's just entertainment. You know, like eat popcorn. Music is good. Everything is good. Acoustics, everything. But it ain't real. And at some depth, you know this ain't real. But you're so caught up in it, it becomes real. It's a story, it's this. And you hear people going out of the theater, and none of them were talking about the screen. They were all talking about the movie, you know? And that's okay. But it's like, that's what life is. It's like a total distraction from what's really going on sometimes. Because it's all made up, and we make it up. And if you're an alcoholic, you're much better at making this stuff up, you know? alcoholics of my type are trying to get out of a reality we're not in, you know? We're like I'm there, but it's there, you know. Well, what do you mean? You know. And people look at you like, ooh, wow, you know. Like somehow you dropped a depth charge and you're it, you know. And you realize that this is the way it is. It's like today, guys come up to me and they say, you know, I'm starting to get some of that enlightenment. And they share things with me. And I start to laugh. And I say, I don't mean to ruin your day, but you're not getting enlightenment. You're just getting out of delusion. You know, like, you were totally deluded. Now you're getting close to reality, and it looks like enlightenment, but you got a long way to go, you know. Like, you know, you're like a piece of sand on the beach, you know. You got a lot of digging left. And the bottom line is that you get all caught up in this stuff. And that's why, you know, when I come to these meetings, I love it because, as Tom said so well, it's a chance to get caught up with yourself. Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for me are like speed bumps. You know, they kind of slow us down. And they allow us to participate in all this stuff. I've been coming so long that I have absolutely no mental defense against the next meeting. You know, I just don't. I just like, you know, I'm saying I'm not going to go and we'll go. I'm not going to go and we'll go. And then I'm saying, what am I arguing with myself? I'm going to go. You know, like, why do this? So I end up going to the meeting. And it's always exciting because to someone there, something's happening that never happened before. And if you're there, you get a chance sometimes to hear them share that. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous for a lot of people is the first time they ever make any attempt to find out what's real. And it's like an interesting thing. And you get to realize that a lot of what's going on in life is really not what's going on at all. And you know, when I look at the steps and I see these steps, all this stuff I went through with my brother and my sister, and you know, I've had a lot of death in my story. It's been a lot of people dying. And it's gotten to the point now where I've kissed a lot of cold lips, been right there, and when the person went from here to there, they were dead. And what I realized is the reason most people are afraid of death is because they've never lived. They're so concerned with what happens next, they're not concerned with what's happening now. Several people over this weekend said, well, what do you think happens to us after death? I don't have a clue. I don't even have an inkling. I'm still trying to find out, how do you do this life thing? How do you live every day? How do you take advantage of every moment? How do you live totally in sobriety and do the things that Peg and Dick and all those people were talking? How do you get to do that on a daily basis and not have to escape and not have to run off and not have to get away from? You know, that's a full-time job. And when I watch these steps, that's why these steps are so great, because these steps, if you take them, it's the only thing we don't do in excess in Alcoholics Anonymous, is the steps, you know? You know, the logo for AA should be excess is not enough, you know? But when it comes to the steps, tomorrow, I'm thinking about them, you know? But if you go through those steps represent the pulse of death, because you have to give up the person you're pretending to be in order to cross the abyss to get to know the person who you really are. And boy, that takes some action. That's not an activity, that's an action. And when you go through this, what you get to see, if you're real good, is that you go through the same process when you die. And that is, you have to give up. Death evicts us from our hiding places, and so do the steps. It takes away all our props and all our games, and it leaves us with totally nothing but who we really are. And boy, it gets to be a lot of fun then, because then you realize what there really is. You know, and as I said before about that projector in the theater, you know, that projector has to run full time, because if it doesn't run full time, you may see a glimpse of the screen. And if you see a glimpse of the screen and you begin to realize the difference between the distraction and the reality, you get an insight into the fact that your mind is very insignificant. And when you get an insight into the fact that your mind is very insignificant, it scares the hell out of your mind. Because it says, uh-oh, if he finds out, I'm out of here. You know? If he ever really gets to it, I'm out of here. He won't need me. because my mind used to have me convinced that its best interest was my best interest. Its best interest was never my best interest, because its best interest was self-preservation. And I had to get past that. And in doing that, I had to laugh a lot. That's why laughter is so important at Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why we laugh a lot. We laugh at you because you need that. You know? You should be laughing at you because we are. Because you're like a home entertainment unit. You have all the switches, you just don't know what goes where. It's like hooking up cable and your stereo and your cable box and the TV and the video, and you say, God, there's a lot of wires here. And then you turn it on and nothing works. And you realize, I just have to rewire this. And that's the way those steps are. It gets you a chance to rewire things. And as was so very well pointed out by everyone I heard this weekend, is that it's a daily process. It's not a running away process. It's a daily process. Tom said, hang in there. Hang in there. The only meditation I meditate on in the last 5 or 6 years is that little slogan that we have that says, this too shall pass. I meditate on that every day of my life. And by meditating on that every day of my life, I take away from life the permanence that it used to pretend to offer me, and I get to live in the total impermanence of it, which means that I can live heartbeat to heartbeat and not really care what's going on. I went to work, I had to go back to work about 3 years ago, and I took some terrible jobs trying to get back into the job market. Then I ended up with a real good job, and we were taken over by another company. So they called me in, and they gave me like 2 options, one of which was to let me go. They said, we can do this or we can do this. What do you want? And I said, well, I really don't care which one you do, because I'm at a state in my life where whatever you do will be the best thing that could happen to me. I never had that leverage in a negotiation before. I always had an agenda. Now I had no agenda. I really didn't care. I wasn't saying that to gain some leverage. I really didn't give a shit. That was just it. I just didn't give a shit. And so what happened was they said, well, we want you to talk to this chairman of the board. So I went into this guy's office, and he says, Ken, he says, I'm sure there's some misunderstanding here. He said, but we're offering you a chance to do this or terminate you. And I know but the guy said, you said, whatever we do is the best for you. I said, absolutely right. There's no misunderstanding at all. It's absolutely right. If you do this, it'd be the best thing that could happen to me this Friday. If you do this, this would be the best thing that could happen to me. And you know what? I hope you guys make up your mind, because I want to see what the best thing is. We resolved that by them giving me 2 weeks vacation. They said, go on vacation. I said, I don't have any, because I knew I might be getting terminated. They said, we're giving you some. So I went on 2 weeks vacation, and when I came back, they gave me this other job. I always had a wife and kids and things that obligated me. I never was in a scenario before where I sometimes said I didn't care, but down deep I always had an agenda. I had no agenda. I was totally neutral. Whatever happens is fine. And it made me understand what my sponsor, who's just a real terrific guy, had said to me many, many years ago. He said, sometime in life, you'll come to the realization that the only leverage anyone has on you is that which you give them, because they really don't have any. It's a shell game, because once they do it, they no longer have the leverage. Whatever they do is negative, it's over. That's the worst that can happen to you. And so I was thinking of him that day, and I was thinking of St. Francis, who was our little guy, our little patron guy. And I always remember reading about St. Francis, because he wanted to dedicate his life to being poor, hungry, and homeless. You can't get leverage on a guy like that. So what do you want out of life, friends? Be hungry, homeless, and, no money. Come on, Francis, You keep screwing up, we're going to give you something. And the deal is that to be nothing, I don't even know how to put this into words, so I hope it comes out something the way I'm feeling it, but nothing that I wanted out of life in the last 5 or 6 years has happened. Not a thing. And yet, I'm in the best place I could ever be in. I know that sounds committable. I mean, I know it does. I know it sounds fake. It's like guys come over to my house and Ken, like sometimes you say stuff, and like we leave here and we like you and stuff, but we sit in the car outside and we kind of say like, he said this, but is that what he said? Because in life, and I've been there, I know what it is. It's like we're so busy looking for what we think should be there, we miss what's there. This is a deal where you have to almost sneak up on yourself to tell yourself what's really happening. And that's why we have all these paradoxes. It's the only way to make a U-turn through a cul-de-sac in our mind. That's why they say, wow, that's paradoxical. Of course, because if I told you straight out, you fool, you'd never do it, And that's why paradox is so good in AA, because it looks like it's this and you're focused on this, but it's really that. And you don't know it's that until you do this. And then you know it's that. So sometimes, like the song says, you don't know if it's this or that. It just is. But the nice part about it is after a while, you don't give a hoot. You just don't give a hoot. You get a chance to laugh at a lot of things that other people just miss. They're just missing it because they're so intent, they're just so intent. I work in La Jolla in California, and there's like an on-ramp to a major highway, and on Friday night it takes you maybe 25 minutes to come down this little area, less than a mile, to get on the freeway. And there's a speed area there where you can go if there's two or more in the car. So last Friday night, I'm there, and I'm about 2 cars away from getting on the freeway after a half hour waiting, and some kid pulls up, and he's in the line where you have to have 2 or more, and there's a cop there, state highway patrolman. So this kid's going to get nailed for whatever they charge him, some ridiculous amount of money, $300-400 if they do that. So when the light changes and the cars in front of me pull out, I beat my horn and let him come over. And when the light changes, the cop lets him go and pulls me over. And he says, "Sir, what was that about?" I'm sure in his mind he thought it was like a police thing or something. He said, "You have something against the police?" I said, No. I said, "He looked like a 25-year-old kid to me." I said, "He's probably just got paid. He's rushing to get home." I said, "And he just happened to be in the wrong lane. It's going to cost him $300 or $500. I said, "I don't know about you, officer, but when I was that age, if you focused on my mistakes, you'd have a full-time job." So he kind of looked. I love that when people give you that look like. And they know they have to say something, but they don't have a clue where to go. So now I'm pulled over. It's like, okay, okay? So I said, I realize I probably broke a lot of laws. He said, "You think?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I was nice, and I prevented someone from committing a crime." I said, "You must be a special ticket for that." So he says, "Why don't you just go on home?" And, I love people, whether they're in law or whatever, because everybody's doing the best they can. There's just sometimes when you don't have a hook into them and you're not trying to get them really to do anything, they have no idea what to do with you. To be totally neutral is real. I like it. I really like it. I wish I could be that way all the time, but I forget. Peggy talked about it. Sometimes you forget. But it's like you get a chance sometimes to do things that are just so enjoyable inside because you're doing them for someone else. You're on the back of a line and somebody waves you up to the cash register and you go first, and you see some woman bearing down on you with a cart, because she's been there for like 20 minutes, and when I see that happen, I always stop, and I go, come on, and I wave them in there. I said, "God, I'm glad you got here. We were saving the space for you, and you just kind of, and they're putting their stuff on that thing that's taking it away from them, and. And looking at you like, okay, I think he just did something nice, but I don't know yet, And I had this woman a couple of months ago did that, and then when she got up there, it says, the lettering is so big, it was like, do not enter, like we saw. Do not enter. And it was like one of those signs, and it said, no checks in this line. Of course, you know what she had. So she gets out her checkbook, and she says to the lady, do you take checks? Beep, 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 beep. So that's why I'm telling this story, because I heard Peggy's story about the check. And it's like, and the woman said, okay, and so she took the check. And actually, it was a guy, and he took the check, and he wrote it down for this woman. And then he says, can I have your phone number? And I said, don't give it to him. He'll never call you anyway. And she started laughing, and you know what? There's something about somebody in crisis where when you see them really laugh, you know they forgot whatever it was, at least for that moment. She may have got out to the car and shot somebody, but, for that moment, she had like a release, And the guy said to me, that was nice. I said, oh, no. I said, it's just worth it. I said, because, in life, you don't get a chance that often to really do that. You get a chance to think about it, but you don't get that many chances to do that stuff. Alcoholics Anonymous is great because it's not about what you think you should do. It's about what you do. And that's why, I used to hang out with guys when I first got sober, and that's what they taught me. Today we hear this word spiritual a lot in AA, and it's spiritual is the whole deal. It says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, at least a copy I have, it says we suffer from a spiritual malady. And when that malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And then in the 12 and 12, it talks about the spiritual axiom. Whenever we're perplexed or upset or whatever, it has nothing to do with anybody else. It just has to do with where we're at the time. And if you take that word spiritual and you look at it, and you look real close, you'll see inside of the word spiritual the word ritual, R-I-T-U-A-L. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It's getting spiritual by doing the ritual. The ritual is I do these steps. Doesn't matter what I'm thinking, it's what I'm doing. I'm doing these steps. Sometimes they come off real good. Sometimes they come off like Custer, but the main thing is I'm doing them. And by doing them, I get a discipline. And I heard several people mention the word discipline today. The word discipline comes from the root word disciple. It comes from the root word disciple. And it really means to make simple. When you are disciplined, you have made your life simple. People who live disciplined lives live simple lives. They're not complex. They're not every day wondering why the moon is coming up tonight and the sun's coming up tomorrow. They don't think like that. They just, hey, it came up yesterday, probably come up tonight, Yeah. I'll give you 8 to 5, it happens, And the deal is that you just come to that realization that it's going to happen the way it's going to happen, and you might as well do the best you can to facilitate it happening. Because if you don't, you spend your whole life at odds with things. I am so glad about 10 years ago, we were so inundated at our meetings with people who were coming from all kinds of areas of things. And they were bringing these ideas into AA. And thank God there were spiritual, disciplined, sober, older members of Alcoholics Anonymous who continually said, what you're saying could be 100% correct. But what we suggest you do is do these steps first. And as you're doing these steps, our experience is that a lot of the things that you're talking about just seem to resolve themselves. Because what you find out is it's your perception of life. That's what life is. It's not about what's really going on. It's our perception of life. It's like a snail sitting on a turtle going, wee! It's like, that's a... it's the way, it's not what's happening, it's what we think is happening, And alcoholics of my type always think in our mind somewhere that if I have a knowledge, a true intense knowledge of what's taking place, then somehow it really changes the ramifications of it as it pertains to me. which is the biggest bunch of bullshit you could tell anyone. The ramifications are going to be exactly what the ramifications are. You know, you catch your hand in your door of a car, you're going to find out it doesn't matter where you are in the program. Certain words will come to your mouth that you thought that you had completely forgotten about, you know? Like, where did that word come from, you know? And it just happens because that's the way it happens. And it's meant to happen that way because it's like God sneaking up on you saying, see, I know you got it. Don't want to lose it all, otherwise you don't become very valuable to me, you know? I need you to be tainted so you can deal with other tainted people, you know? We don't want you to be perfect. And it's not about self-knowledge, you know? Self-knowledge is the booby prize in AA, you know? Bill talks about it in his little story. It says, surely, I never met Bill, but he must have talked like that. Surely, this must be the answer. Self-knowledge. And the next sentence says, but it is not. You know, it's not. It's poquito. It's nothing, you know. It's not worth having, you know. Because we're alcoholics. We scratch stuff that don't itch, you know, like we make up things so that we can make up things that we didn't know we were making up, you know. We come out of blackouts like we just were elected to something. Yeah, so on that matter, you don't know where you are, you don't know how the hell you got there, but suddenly you're the expert on whatever was being talked about at the time. Yes, in my vast experience, you know, that's why I get along so good with alcoholics, because their minds are so twisted. And it's not like they're bad, they're just twisted, you know, like a pretzel. A pretzel looks good because you say, well, it's twisted, you know, that's a good pretzel, you know? And the thing is that we want to glamorize it, you know, like, it's like character defects, you know? I don't know about your character defects, but I get to work on my character defects, and then what happens is they surrender. They say, enough of this guy working on me. So what they do is they trot around and they get at the end of the line. And so I get to work on another one. And about a year later, the one that I had so elegantly handled a year before is like right there again. And of course, I take the austere position of, this looks vaguely familiar, you know? And it's almost like, here we go again, you know? But the nice part about it is in between, I go to a lot of meetings, I get to laugh, I get to hear stories that you could not make up. You could not make up. That's why I never go to the movies. You say, you never go to the movies, you never watch TV. It's so secondary. I have 8 guys over my house, and we're sitting there on the floor, and I love pizza. I can only eat one piece of pizza. I am laughing. The tears are coming, because these are their best ideas. You know, these are not only ideas that they have, like, they're not giving you the rough draft, you know. These are things they contemplated for a week and wrote down and took legal pads. Yeah, let me share this with you. And you know, you're sitting there and you just want to go to the bathroom. You know, like, and you don't want to leave because you'll miss the punchline. You know, like, and it's never the problem. Is never the problem. It's the solution. You know, the solution is always the problem, because these guys, you know, like. Okay, let me see now. I don't have a job. Okay. My wife just left. Okay. The kids are in turmoil. Okay. I've done some things that legally have put me in jeopardy. Okay. But I'm looking at this Honda. And it doesn't have leather. And you know they said it because you heard it, you know, like, oh yeah, the Honda's definitely the problem. Maybe the answer is another dealership, you know. There is a solution, you know. And then the other guys are looking because they're wondering what's going on too. And it's like waiting their turn to share their calamity. You know, like, yeah, well, you think that's bad. Let me tell you this story. You know, like, and it's like you're playing poker, and everybody has an ace. But there's just too many in the deck. Like, you can't play poker with 12 aces. You know, it just doesn't work out real good. Everybody has a good hand. You know, and you sit there sometimes, and when they leave, my neighbors come over sometimes and say, some of the guys stop by? Because we got to close the doors. I mean, and now, like, I have things in my house that my granddaughter's another gal, like Peggy was mentioning her she comes down, and everything I do now is godlike, I guess. When I say God, not me, but I think of it. And I play checkers with her. And it used to be, she's 9 now, almost 10. But for several years, it was easy to let her win because she didn't know the rules. So Grandpa could make any kind of U-turns and whatever and put myself in a position to be jumped. But now she knows the rules. So now she'll say, Grandpa, you can't do that. You can't make that move. See, you've got to go here or here or here or here. And so to let her win is a much tougher job. And I was playing checkers with her 2 weeks ago when she was down, and near the middle of the game I thought, this is exactly what God has to put up with me. You know? He wants me to win, and I keep making these stupid moves, you know, like and he keeps saying, come over here, I want to king you, and I'm no, let me go this other direction first. There's some detour and some red lights and some barricades. This must be the way. This must be the way, you know. And that's what, you know, I think, God said, oh, please, you know, just slow down, lad, you know. Just slow down, you know. Your catastrophe waiting to happen, you know. And that's the way I am. I'm a fanatic, and a fanatic is someone who, forgetting the end, multiplies the means. You know, like, and I get on some things, and I'm just a fanatic. And that's just the way it is. But at the same time, I have those moments where it's so tranquil. It's so tranquil that I can see the screen. There's no doubt the screen exists. Except I get going again. I forget. And when I forget, that's when I take on myself, whoever myself is, that, you know, that robe of myself. And when I remember, and that's where the word remember comes from. It means to join up again, to remember, become a member again. When I remember I'm part of the whole, I don't do that stuff. But every now and again, you just have these mental lapses, spiritual breakdowns, whatever you want to call them. Thank God they're momentary. They're not weekly or monthly or yearly. But they're momentarily. And when they happen, you realize, here we go again. But the nice part about it is that by going to meetings, you continually get to hear people say that they're alcoholic, their life is unmanageable, and that they have a solution, a common solution on which we can all agree, and the solution is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it doesn't matter what other things happen. I realize some people had some tremendous negative upbringings. My mom raised 7 kids. And, you know, she used to say to me, you are no day at the beach, you know. And the bottom line was, you know, she used to say simple things like in California, they say, you know, get a career. My mom used to say, hey, yo, get a job, you know. Get off the corner. Try to do something to make me proud that's not indictable, you know. And she was just this great stand-up gal. And she had a way about her that I knew she loved me. She didn't understand me, not by a long shot, but she sure did love me. And when I hear people come in who have all this other stuff going on, it's almost like, you know, if you could just kind of take the big book and kind of, you know, not hurt them, but like just touch them up beside the head, like, you know, here's what I want you to read, you know, just to get you started, you know. And you heard it here from people who were much more eloquent than me in terms of like, that's what we do here. We do the action. And we do it in a ritual way. We do it over and over and over again. And it gets to be of great service to other people. And in the practice of doing that, we lose track of the make-believe person we are, and we get to find out who we really are. We're evicted from our hiding places. Boy, what a great place to be evicted from your hiding places. To be put out there in the light and know, okay, this is it. You know, I was reading something the other day by Thomas Merton, and it was interesting because it was before the space shuttle went up, this space thing went up. And he said, what does it do a man to go to the moon if he cannot cross the abyss and know himself? You know, and that's the deal here. We have minds that bring us to the abyss, but fortunately, we have steps that allow us to cross it. It's the bridge. It's the bridge from shore to where we are. And it allows us to go there. And all you need is trust. Trust and willingness. You know, I don't want to speak for AA because I have no capacity to do that. I don't even want to speak for anyone else in this room. But I'll tell you, the whole journey of my life today is spiritual, to the best that I can do it. There's no atlas that can take me where I need to go. There's no Thomas Brothers that will direct me on how to get there. But by coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and staying active and being the best thing I can be as an active member and a sober member, what happens is I get to see today what I need to see today. And I can't see tomorrow, and I don't have to worry about too much about yesterday because I've already done yesterday. And I've done the best yesterday I could do because I'm not going to get another shot at it. And I get to come to AA, and I get people in my home, and I have things in my home that my granddaughter loves, my nieces and nephews, their kids come and visit, they love. I have a Buddha that when you walk past it, it laughs. I have a monkey that when you clap your hands, it does the Macarena, you know. I have a big sunflower, and it sits there, and as you walk by it, it sings, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," and the leaves move up and down, you know. And when guys are there who are real, like, you know, the macho, you know, I got tattoos, born to kill, I'm somebody, you know, I'm macho man, you know. They go by that flower. It's all over. It's all over. The rest of us are so laughing that they have to just like collapse, you know, like, okay, maybe that's a little funny, you know. But you know what? We're all trying to do the same thing here. We all have at some depth, as the book says, deep down inside each one of us, there's the glow, the knowledge, the whatever you want to call it, that lets us know there's something greater and that we're not connecting with it all the time. And it's what sustains you. It really is what sustains you. And every now and again, you'll get a glimpse of it. And that's all you get is glimpses of it. I don't think anybody gets an ongoing view of it. I think you get a glimpse here. And you just get enough of a glimpse to know it's there. You know, when I was drinking, you know, I never had glimpses. You know, when I was drinking, I had more deja and less vu. You know, I was like, you know, I didn't know how to be where I was, as Tom talked about. I mean, I would be somewhere, but I'd never be present. You know, I could be absent and there. That seems like a contradiction. You know, in school, people used to say things to me, and I used to look like, what are they talking about, you know? I remember when I was thinking about quitting school because the teacher didn't know anything. Science teacher didn't know anything. My mom said, what do you mean he doesn't know anything? I said, well, he said today, if you take something into your system, it takes 24 hours before it processes through your system and comes out. And she says, well, that's probably what it does. She said, I don't know. It's probably what it does. And I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't know anything about Thunderbird. You know? You take Thunderbird in your system, 11 minutes later, things are happening, you know, like, you have stuff coming out that you didn't even know you could store, you know, like, and it's like, you know, and if he doesn't know about Thunderbird, how can I count on him for the real important stuff, you know, like, maybe he just doesn't know. And the nice part about it is that when I got sober, you know, fortunately for me, I hooked up with a sponsor at the first meeting I went to because a guy walked up to me and said, I'm going to be your temporary sponsor. He still is. It's 28 years later, you know, and I was talking to him the other day, and he's great because his insanity is all now like spiritual insanity. He's crazy as ever. It's just that he's perceptually different, you know, like he had a house that was a nice sized house, because he had a bunch of kids, had 7 kids too. And they all got into some kind of trouble with drugs and alcohol, so he bought houses across the street for each of them. So he had like 4 or 5 houses across the street from his big house, like the plantation system, only these were his kids. And anyway, the deal was is that last summer he sold his house. It was just too big. And 3 days after it closed escrow, it burnt to the ground. The guy tried to put air conditioning in or something, and it burnt to the ground. And his wife is Ellie, and he says, Ellie and I are having a real good time in retirement, because he lives in a house right across the street. He said, we sit on the porch every day and we drink coffee, and we watch them rebuild that house. He said, and they're doing stuff we would have never thought of, because the materials they're using and stuff just didn't exist when we built it. He said, and I'm saying to Ellie, I don't think I'd do that. I think I'd do this. And she said, Packy, you're not doing anything. You're sitting here having coffee. It's their house. Yeah, but I don't know if I'd do that if I did this. And I get Ellie on the phone, and she says to me, because they owned a little home it was a big home at one time, I guess, but it was like $20,000. There was a time when a $20,000 home was like big, expensive house. So they just sold that house. But he used to go to meetings then years later and say, yeah, we lived, when I got to AA, I was living in a $20,000 house. That's when I heard the story the first time. Well, then years went by, and he said, yeah, I was living in a $50,000 home when I got to AA. I was living in a $100,000 home when I got to AA. I was living in a $200,000 home. Every time he got a cake, the price of the house went up. So when he had 30 years, a couple of years back, I called, I said to Ellie, what's the price of the house? So he sent me a telegram, and it says, the house is now on the market for $850,000, but we will not turn down any bona fide offer of $750,000. That's the kind of guy he is, he is totally warped, but in a good way. I always remember that house, because when I first met him, his daughter was 16 and she was running away from home. And I said to her, where are you going to go? And she said, I don't know. She said, but I got to get more living space than I have here. So he went and talked to his daughter. This is a guy in sobriety. His solutions were always so practical. So he said, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to run away, Dad. And he said, where are you going to go? She said, I don't know. He said, are you mad at us? And she said, no, I just need space. I don't want to eat at the table. I'm the oldest. I don't want to eat with the rest of the kids. So he said, okay. So he said, can you give me 2 weeks to work on this? And she said, sure. So he brought in a carpenter, and he added a room upstairs in the attic. And he put a dormer, I think they call them, on the house. And he put a stairway up there. And he said, you can run away up there, and then we'll know where you're at, and you'll be comfortable. And that's where she ran away to. She ran away from the second floor to this new deal. And after about a month, she started coming up to meals again, because she didn't like eating up there by herself. And I remember I said to him, how did you think of that? He said, I didn't. I prayed about it. And people who have always impressed me in Alcoholics Anonymous are people who do less thinking and more praying. I saw a bumper sticker on a truck the other day. It says, life is fragile, handle with prayer. And I thought, what a great bumper sticker. I almost hit the guy looking at it. Because, my reaction skills, something's happened to my reaction. My foot and my brain used to be like in unison. And now it's like, my foot gets the message, but sometimes there's a delayed action now. It's like, okay, I'm thinking about, I better do that, And you kind of like, you make different kinds of stops now. Like sometimes I call them milkshake stops. Like the guys go, it's a milkshake stop. Yeah, But the nice part about this whole thing is that this weekend, when you stop and you go home and you reflect on this weekend, you came here and you had the opportunity of hearing a number of people share about the fact, and this is scary to tell you this, that none of us know anything. I hate that when they tape that. But and what we're sharing with you is we don't know anything. And in not knowing anything, we can be of service. If we knew something, we'd be totally useless. Because then we'd have to think about it. 3 words you never want to hear an alcoholic say is, I've been thinking. You know? You know, it would scare the average person, you know, like, because we have things go on that really should be condemned, you know? You know, if it was a building, it would have been torn down. You know, get it out of here. You got to be kidding me. But the nice part about it is that I heard Tom say that, you know, he didn't know a whole lot. Heard Peggy say it. I didn't hear Dick, but I know he says that. And I don't know anything. I mean, they don't even know a whole lot. I don't know anything. And I always think of that line from The King and I where Yul Brynner says, there are some days where I'm not sure of what I absolutely know. You know, every day's like that for me. What I thought I knew, I don't know. And what I never was able to do, I can do. And what I used to have to think about doing, now I just do without thinking about it. It's called action, into action. And the book says very clearly, you know, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. We're supposed to be having a good time here. This is not supposed to be a series of problem solving. It's like, yeah, I got this new book. It's all about how to solve more problems. In fact, that's the name of the book, More Problems. Subtext is problems I didn't know I had, but I do now, you know. Then there's the first chapter is about problems I may have never had, but I could have had, but I should work on them anyway, just in case they come up, you know. It's like all about problems. That's not what this book says. You open this book to page 132, and it says, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. It's the centerpiece of that page. I don't know if you ever looked at that page. It's the centerpiece of that page. On page 132, there are 33 lines on that page. And this is where, the 17th line. It's between 16 from the top and 16 from the bottom. There's 2 words to the right, there's 2 words to the left. It's perfectly centered. It's the centerpiece of our program. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. Why would newcomers want what we have if we're not enjoying it? Yeah, I've been here 10 years and I've had a good day. But if you want what I have, and you're willing to give up everything to get it, follow me. You know? Who the hell are these people? Where do they come from? You know, like, are they spacecraft in or what? You know? I always think of those stories, like, and sometimes old timers are not always the best authorities on things. You know, it's like a kid comes into the program and says, yeah, you know, 2 weeks ago I was in a hot tub with 4 or 5 beautiful women, all nude, drinking all the booze I could possibly drink. And you get some old timers saying, well, thank God you'll never have to do that again. We're going to give you this book, boy. This book for 5 women and a lot of booze. I hope there's something in it. You know? But that's why I love to come to these things. I love to hear people laugh. I really do. I know that when you laugh, you're not thinking. Because you cannot laugh and think at the same time. And anytime you're laughing, it's like, whew, man, I'm catching a break from me. You know? And that's why Alcoholics Anonymous laugh a lot, because we need the break, you know? We need the break, because in life it can be so overpowering. You know, I don't watch the news, but people insist on telling it to you. You know, you go to check out even at the store, and it's like, you know, angel comes and takes baby back. You know, what kind of a paper is this? You know, I better start buying papers more or something. You know, I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. 2 weeks ago, there's a knock at my door. It's a little boy, and he's wearing a Cub Scout outfit. And he says, sir, if you buy the newspaper, if you buy the San Diego Tribune for a month, they'll give you a week for free, including Sundays, and it cost you $30 or something. And I said, oh, okay. I said, now, why are you doing this? And he said, because, sir, we get $5. The Cub Scouts get $5. I said, oh, okay. So I went and got my wallet. I came back. I said, here's $5. Don't give me the paper. He said, I don't have a card for that. So his mother's over by the mailbox, and she's gone. She doesn't know what's going on. So I said, it's okay. I just want him to have the $5. She said, well, no, you got to take the paper. I said, no, I don't want the paper. I just want to give him the $5 for the Scouts. She said, well, we don't have any receipts for that. I said, I'm not asking you for a receipt. Do whatever you want to do with it. She said, well, how do you know I won't keep it? I said, I could care less. I said, I'd pay a hell of a lot more not to get that paper, you know? I would pay double and not even blink an eye not to get that paper delivered. So she looked like the policeman, you know? And she held her son by his hand all the time after that. It was kind of like, well, you know, I love this thing called life. I don't understand it all the time. Sometimes it's torn my heart out. Sometimes it's left me where I had no idea what was going to happen next. But, you know, I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous now long enough to know the ritual. I know the ritual. The ritual is get up, get dressed, and go to the meeting. I don't know sometimes even why I'm in the car going to the meeting, because I could think of half a dozen rational reasons why I shouldn't be going to that particular meeting at that particular time. But I'm going anyway. And you know why I'm going? Because I know something down deep inside that has been the recurring theme of my sobriety, and that is that when I leave there, I'll feel good. When I leave there, I'll feel good. And why I feel good, I don't know. That's why sometimes I listen to people at meetings. I'm not for changing anything in the big book. I'm not for changing the steps. I'm not for changing anything. If there was one change, though, I think that when you share at a meeting, it should be compulsory that you listen to what you're saying. I do. I believe that with all my heart, that it should be compulsory that you should listen to what you're saying. I get so tired at meetings sometimes hearing people say, you know, I'm so glad I came to this meeting. I've never come to this meeting that I haven't left feeling better. I haven't been here in 3 months, and I won't probably be back for another 2 months, but every time I come here, I feel better. You say, would you please listen? I don't care if you don't listen to anybody else. Listen to you. You know, you're saying what you need to hear. And you're saying it so loud you can't hear it. You feel like going over and saying, do you mind if you repeat that for me one time slow? When you come here, you feel better. When you leave, you feel the best. So now we won't see you again for a while? Hello, Bill. Bill, please do something for this child right now. You wonder what is going on. Yoo-hoo, is the wax that thick? Are you adult child of a deaf person? Listen, you're saying the best thing you need to hear. You belong in the meeting. Hey, Sparky, You think, wow, that's a real regular road runner, it's like watching Wile E. Coyote go off the cliff, and then suddenly he realizes he's off the cliff. And you hear him say, darn. And that's what I listen to when I hear these people. Are you listening to you? It's bad enough you don't want to listen to anybody else. But please listen to you, because you're saying some stuff you really need to hear. I mean, let's go real, real slow, And you know what? You can't hear it. You just can't hear it. Got other things to do, I want to come back in 2 months and tell you how bad it's gotten because I didn't do what I knew makes me feel good. And then I want to tell you I'm restored to sanity. I don't have to come to AA anymore because I think I got it. And I don't want to get any more of it. Because God knows it's starting to work. I know for the first time what makes me feel good. So now I'm going to avoid it. Amazing. I shared with a guy the other day something that came into my mind. He was asking me about God in my life. And I said, well, I have to be very careful have to be very aware of is that I don't use God as a hand puppet. You know, I had the capacity to use God as a hand puppet, and that is I'd show the world God's face, but my hand was involved in making it work. And in sobriety, what I've had to do is just take my hand out of it. And, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that as you folks go back to all your little homes tonight or tomorrow or the next day, you're going to carry with you something you heard, hopefully, or some new friendship that you developed here. But I'll tell you this, we will never meet as a group again. The people who are in this room collectively will never all be here at the same time again. It just won't happen. Some of us will move away, some will die, some will get sick. And next year when you have this, the chairs will be filled, but there'll be different people. Some will be the same, but there'll be a lot of different people. And so you don't want to miss the opportunity to do whatever it is you feel you should do now. Don't put it off. You know, I can talk from personal experience that you never know when you walk from this room to that room, you may have just seen that person for the very last time you're ever going to see them. And if there's something you think you should say, then do yourself a favor. God bless you. Go back and say it, even though it comes out dopey. You know, I had a sister die from this disease in 85. She died Christmas Day. She died an alcoholic. She had cirrhosis, and then she died in a convulsion. And she died weighing about 60 pounds, and a week later my brother died, New Year's Day, from alcoholism. And my brother and I, my brother was one of these guys, he never touched anybody. Never. I mean, shaking hands was a problem. And when he left, after we buried we went to the cemetery and we had to step over my sister's marker because they didn't have time to do anything, and to bury my brother. And my mom, who was there, just kind of threw in the towel, and a few months later she died. And we were back at that same cemetery, and they hadn't even had time to put in the headstones for my brother and sister. Now we were putting my mom in there. And my brother took me to the airport in Newark, because he lives in New York. And I was leaving. And I gave him a big hug, which I always hugged him. And when I hugged him, it was like putting your arm around a tree. You know, he would just kind of stand there. And it was no doubt in my mind that he loved me. He just didn't know anything else. And I even gave him a kiss. I gave him a kiss on the forehead, and I said, I love you, and this is going to be okay. I don't know how it's all going to work out for us, but we're all going to be okay. And I started down the ramp, and it was one of those deals where they had two doors where they were like making sure you went in the right door because there was two planes basically getting loaded at the same time. And I heard the flight attendant say, sir, you can't, sir, and I turned around, it was my brother. And he came and he hugged me. He just put his arms around me. And he said, I love you. And I've always loved you. And goddamn, I'm not going to let you go without telling you. And so there we are, two yahoos. And they're trying to load two planes, and we're standing right in the middle of everything. And you know New Yorkers, they're very sensitive. You almost done? You know? It's going to go on forever? You know? And when I got on the plane, I was wearing a sweater. And my brother and I had stopped for coffee and donuts. And when I got on the plane, I looked, and his finger marks were in my sweater, in the outline of the little sugar from the donut. And I said, thanks, God. Thanks for not letting us miss this opportunity. And you know, as was said today by the folks I heard, that's the exact same thing with Alcoholics Anonymous. Thanks, God. Thanks for not letting me miss this opportunity. I could have missed this whole deal, you know? And I could have gone the way I was going, and it would have been a different speaker here tonight for sure, and I don't know what would have happened to me. But I'll tell you this, and I mean this with the clarity of a sober person, and that is, I'm way past my expiration date. I'm way past my shelf life. No matter what happens to me from this point forward, nobody owes me anything. I've had a good ride. This is the best ride I could have had. I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to live a life that I would have given up not knowing its value. And I learned the value of it by listening to people who didn't know anything about their own lives. This is a game where it costs you nothing short of everything. It costs you nothing short of everything. If you're not willing to put it all on the table, then you're not in this game. It's got to be all or nothing. And I want to thank all the folks, from my sponsor on down to all the folks that I worked with. I want to thank all the people here tonight. I'm going to end by telling you a quick little story, and then I'm going to sit down, take 2 minutes. My son died a few years ago in a hospice, and I got to hold him as he died. And Peggy mentioned today about perception, life being a perception. I go there. He died September 7th, and I go to that hospice every September 7th, and I sit in that meditation chapel for about an hour during that last hour he was there. And Joan Kroc, whose husband started McDonald's, who passed away and is very affluent, very wealthy, she donated that hospital. And now she has donated to that hospital a children's playground for kids who have grandparents or parents or whatever in that hospital. There's only 22 beds. But they have this beautiful playground, and it has this matting on it so that if you fall, as a kid, you don't get hurt. It has a lot of give to it. And I was coming out of there perceptionally, and it always does me good to go there. And there were parents coming out from visiting whoever inside, and they were gathering up the kids that were there. And the kids didn't want to go home because this was a fun place. This was a fun place. They were having fun playing outside a facility where someone directly related to them was going through the last days of their life. And their parents or whoever who brought them there were inside emotionally being used up. And these kids were having so much fun. And as the parents put their hand on this kid's hand, several parents, and started to move, the kids were saying, "Can we come back? Can we come back here?" And the parents, of course, just want to get away from there. Just want to get away from there. And you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is exactly like that. You come here and you give up everything in order to get access to the playground. And you don't get access to the playground unless you're willing to give up everything. And on any given day, you don't know what you're going to have to give up to stay sober, but if you want access to that playground, you got to give something up. And fortunately, God doesn't ask more of us than we're capable of giving. And I want to thank you for letting me be on the playground. It's the most fun I ever had, or I ever think I could have had. God bless you, and I love you, and thank you for inviting me. God bless you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.